Looks like the room's open. Good evening, Brooke.
Good evening, Tudor.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and good evening. We'll just give it another minute. Balaji's already in the room. I'm going to bump him up. Just give me a second. And it's on. Hello and welcome to the Genesis episode of NFT Radio, where the biggest metaverse conversations happen. I'm Tubadur and my co-hosts today are Andrew Steinwald. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, how are you?
Fine. Great to see you. Matthew Ferrick.
Hey, what's going on, everyone?
Man, that voice. And fellow metaversers, Brooke Walter
Hey, everyone.
and Veritas Kami. Okay, Veritas is about to come into the room. Now, we are beyond thrilled to kick off this series with such an incredible lineup of people that need no introduction. But apparently, I love name dropping, so here goes. We have among us angel investor and entrepreneur Balaji Srinivasan, NFT entrepreneur and creator of the Whale Vault and Token, Whale Shark. We have Sriram Krishnan. Hi. And we have Sriram Krishnan and Aarti Ramurthy, hosts of the iconic Good Time show on Clubhouse. And we have a deliciously mysterious appearance from Park, the designer and artist who's been living in the future, creating pseudonymously for the last 25 years. And we have Metakovan, founder and financier of the largest NFT fund in the world, Dreamer and Doer. So we're all here today to talk about pseudonymity, quite fittingly. Balaji espoused it, Bark and whale shark lived it in varying degrees. Sriram and Aarti pretty much saw it unravel on their show with Metacoven and I. And well, Metacoven and I, well, let's just say we've come to wear it well. Without further ado, on with episode 1 of NFT Radio. Here we go. Andrew, take it away.
Hey guys, yeah. So my first question is for Balaji, and you've been someone who's been discussing the pseudonymous economy for a number of years now. Are you able to explain what the pseudonymous economy is and why is it important?
Sure. Yeah. So I gave a talk on this in 2019 and have tweeted about it more in 2020. I'll probably write like a follow-up essay. But the short version is that I think in the near future, it's really already happening, but we're going to be splitting off our earning names, speaking names, and quote real names from each other, such that you earn under one name, speak under another name, and you use your official government name on forms as is necessary. And part of this is kind of recognizing that, the concept of a real name is itself a technology. And it's a technology that wasn't built for the internet. That is to say, what is a real name? Another term for a real name is something like a social security name, like a social security number. And it's an identifier, a global identifier, where all the records across you in different databases can all be merged together. Another name for a name is a handle, like a handle on a file cabinet. You can imagine a handle with your name on it where someone can just pull it out of a wall and pull every record in all these different databases on you because they've all got the same name on them. And the thing is that when I say real names weren't built for the internet, it wasn't, there was no intention, insofar as they were constructed. There's a book called Seeing Like a State in terms of how names are constructed. Names were built for the state to track you in the current naming system with, first name, last name, and so on, for the purpose of things like conscription. And but they weren't sort of meant for everybody to be able to stalk you. For millions of people to be able to look things up and to just kind of pursue you around the world. And one of the things that's happened is that with real names plus the internet, you have the situation where with your bank account balance, only you can debit from your bank account. You can greenlight that, but anybody can debit from your reputation. And so real names are kind of vulnerable in this fashion because you can kind of have, if you have just one global identifier, anybody can just pile on it, share incorrect things, and you have no defense. And so I think what's going to happen, this is already happening at many levels in society. It's actually one of the least commented on things. It's just people are going to switch over to using pseudonyms much of the time. And the reason I say this is crypto makes it possible to earn under a pseudonym, not simply communicate under one. So for the last 20 years, we've been communicating under pseudonyms. People have been habituated to using usernames on sites like Reddit, for example. Hundreds of millions of people, regularly use pseudonyms on Reddit. And it's been fine, for the most part. The distinction being that an anonym, being totally anonymous, is 4chan. Real name is like, basically like Facebook used to have a real name policy. And in the middle is a persistent pseudonym like Tubador, for example, or Metacoven on a site like Reddit, where you aren't anonymous because you have a recurrent persistent pseudonym, but it's not a global identifier, rather a local one. And you aren't just allowing everybody to link all the records, the database records against you very easily. And the thing about these pseudonyms, the reason I think they will proliferate is you can just pick up and use a pseudonym. You can use it as globally or as locally as you want. And I think the kinds of pseudonyms that will proliferate are those that are related to things like ENS names. So again, not just Tubador, but Tubador.eth. Now, why is that? That's actually the kind of pseudonym that is actually built for the internet, because real names simultaneously give away too much and too little. They give away too much because people can stalk you, et cetera, but they give away too little because they are not unique identifiers. You can't program with them. You can't attach records to them. You can't easily, you can look things up on them, but you have to do all this natural language search, et cetera. If it's Tubador.eth or, XYZ37.eth, with an ENS name, you can actually attach metadata to a name, basically ENS and also handshake and unstoppable domains. These give you programmable names, just like crypto gave you programmable money. And programmable names, once your name is like a DNS record, like a domain name, there's a ton that you can do with that. And I think that's really a big component of how we actually enter this pseudonymous economy. where people actually are using programmable names. Now, I mentioned a number of motivations here. One thing I didn't get into is if you have pseudonyms and people are operating under pseudonyms, you can reboot at any time. Just like you have a limited liability company, you have a limited liability name. So that's to say, reputational bankruptcy on that name. Okay, fine, reboot, do it again. Now, one small context where people use this, there's a site called Exorcism where people are learning, programming exercises, and it actually allows you to learn under a pseudonym, because there's people who are sort of scared to learn in public because they don't want people to criticize them for not knowing something they should have known. And there's many situations like this where people are scared of asking questions because they think, oh, I should have known that, and they don't want to do that as a real name. So that's an example where if you use a pseudonym, you'd be fine. And there's many more examples like this. Is why they proliferate on Reddit. So that gives a précis, I think, of why I think the pseudonymous economy will arise, why it's now feasible because crypto allows you to earn under it, what kinds of names will be used. I think it'll be ENS style names, what kinds of protections it gives you. It gives you like a limited liability name, and why I think that they're going to rise further, because I think real names weren't built for the internet.
That was a perfect précis, Balaji. Thanks so much. One tiny follow-up question, and you can feel free to come back to this later. Metakovan and I have sort of felt that the pseudonymity tends to fall apart the further we are, or the more advanced the technology around us is. For instance, our guest next, Park, has been a very successful pseudonym for over 25 years. One theory is that maybe because he was a pseudonym before all of this technology existed, before our names were out there on the internet and across so many platforms. Do you think it's going to get harder to do this the further we are?
I think we need to educate the next generation to not use their real name, to not put their photo online, to basically just make it harder to be tracked, to give them names like John Smith or the equivalent, if they have to be in government databases, and to basically develop search-resistant names and search-resistant identities. And this is already happening, by the way, like this concept of Finstas versus Rinstas, fake Instagram to be your real self, or real Instagram to be your fake self, or even at the highest levels of society, like, in the US, like James Comey or Mitt Romney, they use pseudonyms. James Comey was like Reynold Niebuhr and Mitt Romney was Pierre Delecto. So even like 70-year-old politicians and, 10-year-old, 15-year-old kids, on Instagram are learning to do this. And I think that the tooling around is going to become better because, one of the things that's going to happen is right now we can still mostly trust photos and videos online, but that's going to, I think, disappear in 5 or 10 years as, certainly people will talk about deepfakes and AI video as they become better and better. And so then, like people's self-asserted identity online, you might be a man, or you might be a woman, you might be, like this or that ethnicity. It's now something where you can use deepfakes to not just generate a fake image, but many images of the same person. So here's me biking, here's me jogging, here's a video of me talking, all super photorealistic and all from the same seed, but that person doesn't exist. And I think that people, right now we're speaking and you can hear my voice, but I think we're going to get audio anonymization, video anonymization, all that type of stuff is going to come online. It's already basically there. The technology is there. It just needs to be kind of deployed. And I think that is how that plus the crypto aspect is just going to be something where very, very few people should actually be able to know which internet identities correspond to the physical person. It'll be similar to not giving out your password to people. But you just won't even give out your username to people. Again, this thing already exists. Like what I'm describing is a culture that already exists with respect to, say, for example, Hacker News. You will find that among a lot of engineer types, they don't actually give out what their Hacker News name is. And that's been around for almost 10 years or so. And I think that's just going to keep expanding as the technology improves.
Perfect.
Balaji, if I could jump in, I have a question for you.
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah. By the way, I just noticed that we are one of a few people with our actual names on the show. So maybe a very, very bad idea. Unless Sriram is actually my pseudonym, and then in which I've all of you successfully fooled. But I think one question for you is for a lot of people listening in the audience who probably just have their original name, on their government ID cards to go with, and kind of accumulated credibility and social capital and financial capital tied to that. And starting a pseudonym means that you have to almost start from like ground zero. Like, how do you think about that? Because in some ways, people have it's an understanding of who Sri Krishnan is. Some good, lots of bad. And then for me to kind of like restart, a different name, that means I have to kind of start like, scoreboard from zero. So how do you think about that? Because I think that's one thing which just stops a lot of people from even getting started.
That's a great question. I'm not sure if you saw my talk on this, but this is what I call the pseudonym.
By the way, you should also, apologize, if you have to pick a pseudonym name for me, what would you pick? You know me very well.
I would tell you to go to ENS and find something there, because if I give it away on a podcast, or Clubhouse, it wouldn't be a very good pseudonym. But what I would actually, what you should do, by the way, is pick something that's like almost random number generated and far away from anything that would be cool to you. The cooler it is to you, the more unique it is to you. You're giving away bits of information. By the way, on that note, just for a second, and I'll get to my next point. Pseudonymity is a continuum. Most people think it's 0, 1, but there's this useful formulation in terms of 33 bits. That is to say, 2 to the 33rd is about 8 billion. And that means that, with 33 bits of information, you can de-anonymize anybody on the planet. That also means that you can define a level of anonymity or pseudonymity that is in between 2 to the 0, where I've identified one person, or 2 to the 33rd, where you could be anybody on Earth. If you have 10 bits of pseudonymity left, you're among 2 to the 10th about 1,000 people, which is still often enough for many purposes. And so once you have that quantitative framework in place, you can start thinking about, okay, can I trade off some pseudonymity for some distribution? Because what you're talking about is, right now the two choices are A, operate under your real name, where you have all of your distribution, all of your capital, all of your distribution, meaning all your Twitter followers or all of your, like email contacts, etc. That's your distribution. And you have 0 pseudonymity because it's 2 to the 0, it's just one person. Or you go all the way to the other extreme, where you have a new, Twitter account, and you could be 1 out of 300 million Twitter users. So it's not exactly 2 to the 33rd, but still a pretty large number. But you have, 0 distribution, right? So you have 100% pseudonymity, 0 distribution. In between those, maybe there's a trade-off. Maybe there's a way of doing a pseudonymous bridge. Once you formulate it this way, once it's quantitative, can we get some distribution at the expense of some pseudonymity? And so I thought about this construct, how you'd set that up once, set it up. And the key insight for me, once I realized that you wouldn't want to be able to port over, or it'd be hard to port over followers to that pseudonym, because followers are by their nature non-fungible. That is to say, you are a follower, but you're the only Sriram, right? And if you just set up a new pseudonym and it had exactly the same number of followers and exactly the same followers as not just number, but the actual identical followers to your real name, it'd be easy to de-identify you, because you'd be or de-anonymize you, because the vector of which followers you have would be identical to the other one. So followers are non-fungible, so hard to port over, but karma is fungible, so it's easy to port over. And with something like Zcash, for example, we've actually already solved the problem of sending digital currency fungibly, from one pseudonym to another. And so I think an analog to that would be not Zcash, but Zkarma, where basically, it's a little technical, but if you have a so-called HD wallet, hierarchical deterministic wallet, you could set up a karma system such that you could transfer it between addresses within the same wallet. So you couldn't transfer it between people unless you share the private keys. You could transfer it between names that you could generate within the same wallet, but that kind of karma could be earned in like a, Reddit 2.0, like a crypto Reddit. And such a karma system, the reason to be interesting is you could build up 1,000 karma under one name and then move it over to another name, provably on chain. It was, like something which you earned. You weren't transferring it to somebody else, but you could now start with a new pseudonym and make a statement, and people would know that you had high reputation in that community, just not who you were precisely, right? And this would be a way to speak without retaliation, to actually port some distribution over to that pseudonym. So the point is, once you start thinking about these things quantitatively, you might be able to express the problem that you just posed, which is a very important one, in technical terms.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that was quite something, Balaji. It's always interesting to hear you speak. I did want to shift some things up. I mean, Tubador told me a very interesting thing about Pac, and is that support, according to Tubador, for Pac, it's not about hiding himself. It's about defining himself through creations rather than a human face or voice. But my question is, have there been any opportunities Pac has missed due to the choice of remaining pseudonymous? Is that something that has reduced your ability in some ways or the other?
Okay, I think we just have a response from Park. Park says, when people see a face or hear the voice of a persona, it's very hard for them to not remember it, as humans evolved to match identity with physical image. Having no face and physicality helps me define myself with concepts rather than a face and a body. This is the primary reason I have very controlled personal data online with many purposeful misdirections. Well, that I can vouch for. This is also why my physicality changes from event to event, presentation to presentation in the actual world if I have to be there physically. Wow, this I did not know. I believe this is where we can make the separation clearly between a person and a persona. Acts and their concepts remain the same, which defines the persistent logical flow of behavior publicly. This is how we can become an idea beyond mortal biological body. Opportunities are sometimes missed, then recreated. This vacuum helped me so far, brought me more than it took away. Does that answer your question, Veritas?
Wow, no, that definitely does. I was wondering if I'd be able to ask another question.
Go for it. Let's see. He might choose to not answer.
I mean, so with that, I guess Pac is saying, is this the ability to maintain Pac throughout time, right? Instead of the, the night and day, I guess, in terms of life nature of humans, as Pac maintains his secrecy, I guess going into the future, it's open to being more than a person, correct?
Yes, he says.
I love it. I love it.
Thanks for summarizing it for him. No, in fact, this is where the concept of pseudonyms as exosuits sort of comes across, right? In a way, Park is wearing this persona. He can be anybody. He can do anything. And like he said, it has brought him more than it has taken away. And 1 second, he's typing. Park says, "Thank you for being my body today, Tupadur. You could have done much better, Park, I assure you, but this was a pleasure."
Awesome. Thanks, Pac. And thanks, Tubador, for being the mouthpiece.
Yeah, that was super weird. And speaking of weird, Sriram and Aarti have had some experience in the matter from from our first clubhouse conversation with Metacoven way back.
Yeah, definitely. I actually had a question for you both, Sriram and RT,
Mhm.
about that. I'm curious how it felt bringing two pseudonymous individuals onto the Good Time show. And then on top of that, then realizing that they too were South Indian. I'm just reminded of the moment where you all began speaking Tamil together, which felt super powerful.
Wow, that is crazy. But Aarti just had to drop out because she had to handle something. But I would say it was a surreal couple of days. Just for the backstory for folks, we all know now, obviously, what happened with the Beeple auction, and the who won that. But the day of the auction, or rather the night of the auction, I get a DM. I think I talked about this. I get a DM from Andrew, who since then has become a kind of a good friend. And by the time I did not know, and saying like, hey, by the people who I can't tell you who they are, but the people who kind of won the auction would like to come on the show. And I got this at probably like, I don't know, like close to midnight the previous day. And I would say typically when somebody you don't know cold DMs you on the internet about somebody that they can't reveal identities of, you tend to be a little suspicious. I was like, okay, that's mysterious. And I spent the next few hours, and by the way, I would say Andrew is very, very highly thought of by a lot of people that I trust. I was like, okay, so Andrew's legit. So in terms of like, kind of Balaji's model, I was like, okay, if Andrew's legit, then, the people he's talking about are legit. But I still felt somewhat nervous about bringing on people that I've never really met or could not research any single way. And for me, and Tudor probably won't mind me sharing this story. For me, the most powerful moment was, the morning of the show, where we actually got on a call. And I had no idea, I had no context going in. And, and when he jumped on the call, I was just kind of blown away. We are, as folks might have survived, we are kind of from similar parts of the world. And I was just like, what are the chances? And that evening, that show was probably one of our favorite shows, just in terms of, it felt so historic, just the timing of it. It was obviously one of the biggest art scenes ever. It felt like a historic moment for NFTs. We had an amazing speech from Dylan Field. It was so historic. So I just want to obviously, having Meta quote Tirukural and breaking into Tamil and just kind of talking about his future, a vision for the metaverse was just amazing. So, I would say, I just have a lot of gratitude. Aarti and I, speaking for both of us, we have a lot of gratitude to both, Meta and Tubador for kind of taking a chance on us and, coming on our show. They could have been on any single TV show they could have wanted, but they chose to come on our show. And it was just probably, a life moment that I won't forget. So thanks to both of you.
Oh, the pleasure was entirely ours, Sriram. Like I said, I've been a huge fan of how eclectic your show is, the range of topics that you cover on a daily basis. You guys are obviously polymaths, and and you made us feel right at home when we walked in, and we needed that before the media frenzy that hit us later on. So thank you for that.
Cool. So I think at this point in the conversation, we've talked a lot about how pseudonymity sort of at a high level works and sort of how people should start thinking about cultivating pseudonymous identities maybe heading forward. But I think talking with someone about how being pseudonymous has really impacted their work and their life in the metaverse or this digital space that we're all sort of building identities in would be interesting. And for someone like Whale Shark, I think you're the perfect person to talk about this with. For folks that are not aware, which may be like 10% or less of the audience listening right now, Whale Shark is the most prolific NFT collector, along with Metagoven, in the metaverse. Various assets from art to virtual land and everything in between. But my question for Whale Shark is, as a collector, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on how, especially in the digital realm, collecting under a pseudonym has impacted or affected your collecting, and then maybe tying in like what collecting means in real life and how sort of anonymous that practice generally is, and what the differences are collecting digitally versus physical objects in real life. I think we could have a really good, interesting discussion there.
Yo, Matthew, and thank you so much for the question. Just honored and thrilled to be among so many deep thinkers in the space. So Matthew, I think I'll answer your question in past, present, and future, right? So honestly speaking, if I was not able to remain pseudonymous as I started to enter the crypto art space, I probably wouldn't have done so to begin with. So the main reason, so a lot of people don't know this, but collecting crypto art or collecting digital art was really my first foray into collecting art as a whole. I was, too intimidated, too scared, and the barriers to entry of the traditional art world, they seemed a little bit too steep for me, over the past, 18 or 20 years that I had enjoyed physical art, but, really never stepped into a gallery simply because that barrier, that those barriers, those educational barriers, they pose very much as a mental challenge for me. So day one of being able to establish the whale shark pseudonym and go into Super Rare, go into Maker's Place, go into Known Origin, and just collect whatever I loved without any judgment. Being pseudonymous really was a tool of empowerment for me to be able to do so. Now, that's the past, right? And when you look at the present, back then, I mean, for all of the collectors who are collecting, I mean, probably Medicoven included, we knew one day that this digital art was going to be worth a lot of money. But back then, I think we were, again, picking up pieces of artwork for $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. Coming to the present now, when you see that, digital artwork and, for example, the $70 million bid from Medicoven on the Beeple piece, all of these pieces are worth a significant amount of money now. So, what does pseudonymity really bring to me right now? It's really a lot of security and privacy, right? I enjoy wearing a pair of shorts and my wife beater, and then after that wearing slippers and sandals, heading down to McDonald's and grabbing a Big Mac without somebody recognizing or knowing who I am, and stopping to talk to me about NFTs, right? So I think that that blanket of security and privacy is very important to me, at least, as I move forward in the space. When you look at the future, again, I love what Pak has done, right? Pak has created this pseudonym that extends beyond the body, that extends beyond physical recognition, and extends beyond time. If a pseudonym is a force for good in this space, why should it only exist for one person's single lifetime? What's not preventing us from allowing there to be a Pak 50 years, 100 years, 200 years into the future? What's stopping there from being a whale shark, right? 50 years, 100, 150 years into the future. And maybe the whale shark of tomorrow isn't me, but he or she does retain the same values or the same persona, right? A force for good, and just continues to make the world a better place. So Matthew, I think those are, just answering your question, I think those are really the three things that pseudonymity has really brought to me as I've entered the space.
Yeah, the idea that an identity can live beyond the initial creator and last generations, I think that's like a really fascinating kind of thought experiment for individuals to keep running and playing out for themselves. But along the course of that pseudonym's life, like Balaji was talking about earlier, there's this continuum that exists for pseudonyms and I guess they're wearers, if you will. And for you yourself, there's a point, I guess, around this time last year, maybe a little over a year ago, when you're starting to set up your whale social currency, and you brought in a group of supporters and insiders to kind of like let them know that you're setting this up, and as they're going to be liquidity providers, sort of like revealing your identity, showing them that, hey, like, if you're going to give me or invest in the social currency, I got to give you a little bit of a like knowledge about who I am as a real individual, just to like obviously avoid rug pulls and things like that. So going back to that time of partially revealing your mundane identity or your maybe real identity, talk about that experience and sort of how that relates to everything that happened since then.
Sure, Matthew. And I can tell you that my real identity is extremely mundane. It is run of the mill. I am the most normal person that you'll ever meet. So look, I mean, that when I set up Whale, essentially, there was Whale Shark and everyone knew he was a collector. But what they did not know was, did he have the track record of success that he claims that he had, so that people could be rest assured that he was going to put everything and all of his efforts into driving this project. Now, the way that I decided to solve that was actually do a manual UPort. And for people who don't know what UPort is, again, it's still a developing technology, and I'm sure there's a lot of other decentralized identity platforms that are developing at the moment. But I wanted to be able to release certain parts of information about me so that people could verify that what I was saying was true without revealing my full identity. Now, we haven't gotten to that stage yet. In an ideal situation, I would have been able to just say, hey, here's my educational background. Here's my working background. Here are some of the PR that pertain to me, and just be able to release that information but without releasing my name. That could not be done. So instead, what I had to do was, really just pick out 10 individuals within the NFT community who were firstly well established within the space. So they themselves were well known, and they themselves, their names were well known. The second thing was that just making sure that they were community leaders. So each one of them who actually verified my identity were community leaders within the crypto space itself. So what they said brought weight. And then after that, what I did was, I took, I busted out a PowerPoint, and then after that, I just started copying and pasting and putting all my information in there, and sending really a packet each out to every single one of them, opening up a Discord, and then having them go in and say, yes, I verify what Whale Shark has said to be true. It was a very prehistoric approach towards doing it. But I do believe that by doing that, people were able to verify me without having seen that information, but based on, very similar to what the group was speaking about just now, I know someone who verified him, and I know this guy is upstanding, and I know this guy is honest, and I know this guy's a leader in the space, and I actually know who this guy is, and he says, or they say, that Whale Shark is this person, so it must be true, right? But honestly, Matthew, I cannot wait for the day that we can create any pseudonym, and just be able to take educational records, health records, professional career records, and really be able to share that information to the extent that we want to, without really fully revealing who we are, where we live, and on all that other type of information.
Brilliant. I mean, we've had so much discussed about the pragmatism of pseudonymity, how it can come to pass, and the various challenges there are, inherently. I thought we could go a little meta now. We have MetaCoven here, and the way I remember it, this idea of pseudonymity was very instinctive to both of us, and we sort of discovered along the way what it could be. So I'm curious, MetaCoven, what do you think of the conversation so far, and can you tell us a little bit about how MetaCoven himself started?
Sure. Thank you for this this gathering here, and I'm very excited to be part of it. Is my audio okay? Because I remember last time it was bad.
This time it's perfect.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Your pseudonym, I think, is growing stronger.
Okay. So, yeah. So where I come from, or the context of where MetaCoven started, is more than just NFTs or crypto or collecting art as a way of investment or something. I'm very active in the traditional space also. So I'm quite I would not say I'm famous, but I'm known by my real name, and I do several stuff, right? And while I work on various stuff, one thing that's very common is the purpose and why I do what I do, right? I think the goal or what purpose I'm trying to go towards is using art and trying to level the playing field for global cultures, because end of the day, I believe that cultural exports are essentially very important as a consumption economy, because we are only creating consumers all over the world, and we talk about every human being as a node in this huge system of economy, and we don't and we centralize that production culture, and then we have a few people producing and the whole world just consuming. And I think that is really bad, and if you want to beat that, I know that we all chase the economy and try to say economic development is what we are going for, but in that scenario, we really reduce the human being into just nodes, and we don't care about them. We only care about stats as a average, as a general idea. And maybe I would have been just part of that stats, and I would have been most probably irrelevant, and and nowhere to be seen while my country was growing, while the world was growing in an economy, right? But because who cares about the individual, and who cares about one specific culture? So I believe that there should be the space where there can be cul- cultures respected and from across the world, so that there can be this initial bootstrap economy for people in the local culture, and they are able to get the leg up without having to immigrate, without having to naturalize them into another culture and then get started. Because when you do that, you are creating a new class hierarchy. You're stratifying the society as a person who just immigrated into a new culture. The example I would give is, we all like for years now, like India, the a lot of people from India just go to America and then settle there. But what we should remember is, while an Indian wants to naturalize him as being an American, he ends up being an Indian American, which he didn't choose. And and even his son or daughter just is as the daughter of an immigrant or half American. Even if they marry and a white person, for example, it still is not gone. It's still the same. So all these things are very important to consider, because we only think about the world in numbers, and I think that is wrong, and we should think about the human behind all of this. So that's where I come from. And and from that scenario, when I started doing what I was doing, I was part of the small culture, and I was making movies. I was doing something locally. Who cares about it, right? Like who watches or who looks into something that's happening, say, in a remote part in India or a remote part in Africa? They don't. So I thought I needed this stage, this global stage, where I can perform and people can look at it, and not from the lens of a pseudonym, sorry, not from a lens of my identity, which is given to be my birth, and instead through my actions, right? And and that was the idea of Metacoven, because I started collecting art well before. And I remember meeting a lot of people as the real me, even before Metacoin existed, where I used to talk about the NFTs I collected, etc. But Metacone was magical, right? Metacone, the pseudonym was really interesting, because people had no idea who this guy, who was the guy behind this pseudonym. And that gave me this stage. I would have loved to have that mystical, enigmatic persona for maybe a few more years. But it never meant to be, completely pseudonymous, because I didn't start it that way, right? As Velshark was pointing out, it's very important to understand where you're starting and what your context is, and that's how you define your pseudonyms. I was not tight on keeping my pseudonyms a very good secret. Whoever I spoke to in the industry, I almost spoke to them as myself, and that was because I think I wanted that work to first go in front of people, and then I was perfectly okay to like introduce myself as a real person, because I don't know where this path is going to take, but I also believe there is going to be a lot of physical work for me, like say going to a museum, working with working with artists in this physical space, and that's going to keep happening. And it already does. I go to film festivals, right? So all these things are already happening in my life, and I think this um, now this whole pseudonym combining with my real name. Um, I would live with it. But the more important thing is what has happened over time is that I've realized that Metacone is much larger than Vignesh. Metacone is larger than the person behind it, and I think the journey of Metacone will continue and maybe even fork into multiple roles, and that's what pseudonyms allow us. And maybe this Vignesh is part of the origin story, but we never know where this story is going to go. and I'm also very excited to kind of find out. I'm also being part of it. I'm living in this moment and seeing how I feel every day about this. But at some point, I believe there'll be hmm, lot of things that happen to Metacode. It could be forks into different characters or something, or multiple people operating the same name, or it could just be a title that goes to another person too. So there is a lot of scope here, and if someone is considering becoming a pseudonym, they should really think about it as like right here in this room we have people with different motivations and different goals, and you are able to see why and why we choose our pseudonym, and kind of um, the the purpose behind it, right? So if someone today is considering a pseudonym, I would say be very clear in what you want to do, because at some point, if your real name and pseudonym gets gets in gets linked up, you need to figure out a way to handle that also, right?
I have a question for you, Metakovan, or really anyone else that's listening. We've both experienced both worlds. For example, Asian culture and Western culture. You can hear about American individualism, but then in Asia, especially South India or Asian cultures, we really focus on that community aspect. Do you think pseudonyms and exosuits are liberating and give that individualism aspect to people from non-individualistic cultures? And it's something I've noticed anecdotally, is that it seems that a lot of folks who are using pseudonyms are from minority groups or people of color.
Hmm. Yeah, I'll try to answer that, and try to be short, and yeah, if anyone else wants to take it also, yeah, sure. So I feel like pseudonyms are a double-edged sword for a person from a minority culture, because the thing is that pseudonyms can um, pseudonyms can allow the stage, but it should not be, like, I don't think it should be treated as a way of I trying to hiding something, right? Like, it's not like I'm trying to hide something about me, which I'm ashamed of, or shy about, right? So it is more to play from the other side, where I feel like the judgment is already existing, and that I want that judgment to be removed. I'm very proud of where I'm from, and who I am, and my identity. It's just that it's not the same for everyone else, right? Like, I'll always say that, like, I'm very much from South India, and for example, when I talk to someone, and I shake my head in a specific way, and people make fun of it, and I find it very offensive. But it's okay to make fun of that, right? Because there is hierarchy of what you can make fun of and what you cannot in this world, and that's something I find very funny, because that's not the case with a different culture with better soft power, right? So that's where I'm coming from. But again, pseudonyms usually get treated like gods from the same Asian culture. Yes, I would like to express myself as an individual, but the problem is, from the very the biggest comment for me revealing my real name was that this story has now become uh, um, less important, right? Like, that was the biggest comment I heard from a lot of people. And when I listened to that, what I felt was people saying that, like, before this time, when I could not relate this to a real person, and I did not see that person behind, there was more magic to it. And people are seeing, people like to create gods in Asian cultures. So that's one thing I feel. We should not go that far to do those things. And and so it's about, like, that balance. And even if you're an individual trying to express individually, it does not end up at the place where I hoped it will. So yeah, it can be taken to extremes, right? So that's one thing I feel. But yeah, in the meantime, it does allow me to express individually, but it's very restricted. It's not like I can express everything, because then it'll just reveal who I am. So it's not very conducive for that.
Brilliant. For those who came in late, we are on episode 1 of NFT Radio. We're discussing pseudonyms and how they double as exosuits, and the various pragmatic as well as meta concerns that one might have about adopting and using a pseudonym in real life. So we're joined by some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to pseudonyms. I have a quick interjection from Park. In fact, he agrees wholeheartedly with Whale Shark's points, and he says, a mask is different than a designed identity. A mask is there to hide a persona. A designed identity is there to create a persona. Think about a movie character. Think about Gollum from Lord of Rings. Who's Gollum? Is he the actor that acts him? Is he the designer that designed his body? Is he Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings? Gollum is Gollum. It's not a mask, it's a designed character. Even if you change the people who act him, even if you change the people who animate him, it will remain in the same identity. So a pseudonym is sometimes not a mask, it's a persona.
Incredible perspective from everyone who's spoken so far. So I wanted to bring up G Money, who's a good buddy of mine, and he's also pseudonymous and been in the crypto and NFT ecosystem for quite some time. G Money, can you tell us about your experiences being pseudonymous in this ecosystem, and do you think you've run into more issues being pseudonymous versus using your real identity, or just tell us all about how it's been for you?
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. Again, I'm really honored to be on the stage with all these people. Just I guess a little bit about my experiences. And I know when I was deciding whether I wanted to go pseudonymous or non-anon, I actually, Andrew was one of the people that I consulted because he is non-anon, and I wanted to weigh the pros and cons. And I come from a traditional finance background, so I think part of it was almost like to protect myself from maybe like ridicule or something, where it's like, all right, when I was telling people about NFTs way back, people would like laugh at me, or like they'd be like, oh, you're buying like JPEGs online, and obviously the stories that we all hear. So I think, like, to me, it was interesting. It was like, okay, this is a way that I can kind of maybe separate the two, like, my traditional finance background with my crypto endeavors. And, obviously the ape was, buying the ape was one of the things that really catapulted me towards influencer status, I guess, or, towards quote unquote fame. And like, that was just like me standing out on a ledge being like, all right, this is how I feel. This is my conviction in it. I bought it at the time. And it's been really interesting because, like, the way I have navigated it from the start has been operating as like, I want to be true to the person who I am in real life, and I'm operating under the assumption that at some point I will be doxxed or people will find out who I am. So I think it's super interesting because I think you've seen it in the last couple of years with the rise of crypto, where at the beginning of the internet, people would use that anonymity or pseudo-anonymity to maybe be somebody who they're not. And now it's almost like people are being who they are as a human, but all that's changing is their name, right? So when I like interact with people, I interact with people online the same way I would in real life, because I assume that at some point those two will merge. And I don't want to be these two different personas, so I want to be true to who I am.
Awesome. Thank you for that, G Money. And then I have another question for Balaji. So have you seen, obviously you're a very active investor in the crypto and NFT ecosystem. Have you seen an increase in pseudonymous founders and teams? And do you think that will become the norm in kind of this ecosystem? Or do you think that will kind of maintain to be more of a niche?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of DeFi founders who are pseudonymous now. And I think, to some of the earlier points pseudonymity prevents both discrimination and cancellation. So as you've got lots of international founders, folks with accents, folks without college degrees, folks who come from off the beaten path, pseudonymity stops them from being discriminated against. They can just basically, show that they can code and that their product is good. So all the gatekeeping can't be applied. It also prevents cancellation. So it prevents people from being attacked for beliefs or, like associations or things like that that are outside of their professional work. And you just have to judge them on their work. So it's this very powerful thing that I think will be seen as similar to setting up a limited liability company, a limited liability name. And so I am seeing it becoming more popular. You've seen it over the last year with DeFi Summer, and I think it's going to become even more so.
I have another follow-up question for Balaji, in fact. Like you said, Balaji, the tech exists and has existed for a while now, but there is an order of effort that goes into crafting and keeping a pseudonym. And typically, before something like this becomes a norm, there needs to be a combination of incentive and sanction, right? In a sense, for instance, stronger passwords allow for anonymity, weak passwords, and you get hacked. Seatbelts and airbags equals faster cars and loopy roller coasters. No seatbelts, and there's a spike in accident fatalities. What do you think the incentive slash sanction mechanism is going to be that will push a generation into pseudonymity?
Well, the sanction mechanism already exists, which is searchability. In many cases, what people are doing with pseudonyms is they're crafting what I called search-resistant identities, meaning that only those people who want to discover who you want to discover you under that name are capable of doing so, and other people are not able to do so because they would just punch in a global identifier and not pull up your Finsta. Your Finsta is under a name that only your friends know. So being found only by those people you want to find you is like this critical design principle. And you can actually start building technology around it. That's why I mentioned the ENS domain type thing. You could actually make it something where, for example, maybe not with ENS, but with a future technology, perhaps people could only do an encrypted lookup. So if I know, troubadour.eth or another pseudonym.eth, and I have a certain set of keys, well, then I can actually get more information out of that name than another person. So your name actually becomes like an input to a function, which is different. So that starts to get to the incentive side, which is programmable names. There's a lot you can do with that, and there's more you can do with it than you can do with just a normal human name. And so I think that's going to be the push and the pull. The pull will be programmable names. The push will be all the cancellation, discrimination that can happen against legacy names or real names. We might call them legacy names.
Awesome. Makes perfect sense. I have, and this question is for all the pseudonyms in the room. I already have a first response from Park, but the question is this. How long does it take one to, sort of build out their exosuits? Is there a point when you realize, as you're working on the pseudonym, that, okay, I think now this persona is complete by itself? Obviously, it keeps adding layers with every passing day. But is there a point at which all of you realize that, okay, this is now complete, it's now finished? Whale Shark, I'd love to know when you realize that Whale Shark is actually a complete pseudonym, a persona.
So I think, for the Whale Shark pseudonym, very similar to what G Money was bringing out just now, all Whale Shark was just myself, but the ability for me to hide my actual name, right? And, very much so, it was an empowerment tool for me to become more of myself, right? Simply because, a name was no longer attached to that. Now, how long did it take to build up, Whale Shark, the person? I mean, the person was always there, right? The values, the ethics, the thought process, the intellectual capacity, it was always there. How long does it take for people to recognize that or associate, certain emotions with that pseudonym? For me, probably within the first 3 to 4 months, I was very active on Twitter. I was very active in a lot of the discords pertaining to NFTs and digital art. So it really depends on how much communication one is putting out there. So for me, again, I think for me, it roughly took about 3 months. And as I continue to grow, more and more people understand who I actually am, not my name, but who I am as a person. And, I think that, that understanding of who Whale Shark is, will only just continue to extend in the future, given the amount of effort, given the amount of time and resources that I put towards communicating to the larger community.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Park says, by the way, that it's much longer than a lifetime. Technology only allowed me to reach more people with it. The last 25 years were related to media, but before that, it was computer science, and before that, it was physics, medicine, religion. There is a long history, and it's almost similar to asking, when did you realize that you are you? And the answer is generally a big obscurity.
Tubador, you're answering Pak's questions really fast. Are you Pak? Just out of curiosity.
Park's mouthpiece.
I'm just kidding. I actually have a question.
Yes,
for
I
anyone
am.
that wants-
Be the answer.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I figured. Question for anyone that wants to jump in. Metacoven and Tubador recently revealed their identities, removed their exosuits, so to speak, in a recent article that went a bit viral. And Metapurse had an outpouring of messages from people all around India saying how inspiring it was to them, and how much it meant to them to learn that the buyer of the Beeple piece was from their corner of the world. I'm wondering if pseudonymous identities will miss out on these types of connections in the future, and what can we do to preserve the power of these types of networks?
Yeah, I can try to go on that. So I don't think like the synonymous person necessarily needs to associate themselves with a particular geography, right? The point of crypto and this whole metaverse is that now you're able to find your own tribe in with just seeing what they are for, right? Like understanding each other's purpose, understanding each other's intention and motivation in a new way. Because traditionally, geography, language, this is how we have been close together, right? Like even 30, 40 years ago, we won't leave our town, right? Like imagine that we've taken for granted all this technology that is in front of us today. I can travel to any part of this world and immediately be living like a local because of all this technology around me. I can look up Foursquare, I can look up Google Maps, I can rent a car, and I'm a local, right? And that feeling of uh, having geographical boundaries totally decimated, I think means a lot more than being able to connect with just the set of people who are close to you physically, right? So I believe historical proximity is still interesting, and it's also kind of a sometimes I feel like it's a responsibility that as a human being, each of us have to lift each other from oppression in any form, right? But that's a general idea, so it's not specific to a geography, history, or a culture. I believe in liberation of all human beings, not just people who I grew up with, or whose culture and language was closer to me, right?
Let me push you a little bit there, Metacoven. I understand what you're saying, but don't you think that geography and socio-political history through initially Pax Britannia, Pax Americana is still driving the narrative? I mean, we're all here conversing in English. I look at Clubhouse, everything's in English. When our exosuits when we reveal ourselves from our exosuits, and there was this outpouring from the Indian community, that what would you see that as a glimpse of hope, as okay, maybe now it's a change of the guard opposed to the old, kind of English centric, Anglo centric system?
Mm, I, one way to answer that is, I don't know how we will all communicate in this world, right? Like, so English, if we consider English as not a specific culture being imposed on everyone, that'll be interesting too. But then the people who do think they own a culture should be able to let it go. And that's the biggest, because we don't want to create another class society. Yes, and that's kind of where we are today, right? But apart from it, as you said, yes, there was a lot of hope, that um, I felt from all the responses, when people knew that we were the buyers, right? And that means a lot. And it was not just from India, right? Like, I've heard a lot of people from all over Asia also, talk about it. All from a lot of people from Europe also, from minority cultures in their own way. So it is all these small, um, pockets of hope that I feel like, over time is going to expand. And it could become a world of multiculturalism, and there could be more, more of expression in our own, from our own culture. It is not just language, it could be lifestyle also. Today we are primarily living a very Western lifestyle. What we eat, what we think about, we always track it back to Socrates. And why should that be? It can be a Eastern philosopher too, right? And Eastern philosophy is has this depth. And but again, there is that factor that's not, we cannot solve it over a day. But this power now, it has been decentralized. And that's what I've been talking about when I speak about decentralized culture, where I feel like this is a rise of the decentralized class, where we are very different from the traditional people who have been patrons of art over years. And now we have the opportunity to support art. That's a huge change in this world, because art uh, dictates narratives for centuries. That's been the history. And now when it's decentralized, I think there'll be more cultures with their own expression. And it'll be a great time for all of us to learn more, from different cultures. And I'm sure that there'll be more people like us, from not just our culture. Because maybe if it's just me again, trying to fight this, new form of cultural battle, it'll be hard. But we need allies, right? Like, from people from all over the world, not claiming that something is superior or something is the best solution, but just putting it out there, and being part of this whole world, as a movement, as a movement towards learning from each other. So yeah, that's where I think we are going. And it's a stage. So I ask everyone to, think about how they can be part of this, and not just a passive, audience, but actively think how, I can be part of this moment.
This is beautiful, Metacon. In fact, to also sort of respond to what Veritas had asked, um, the concept of pseudonymity basically does tie down to the rise of the decentralized class, which includes everybody in this clubhouse room and basically our ilk, right? While it might instantly appeal to those in the minority or underrepresented cultures, it really does sort of indicate the rise of that decentralized class and the sort of a slow but steady erosion of the stigmas around pseudonymity. And by stigma, it's not, it's very weird, because when it is extremely prevalent in a $15 billion industry like gaming. The first thing you do is to adopt a pseudonym when you log into an Xbox or a PS4. At that stage, it's considered juvenile. But when it happens at a slightly higher level, say when you announce that the buyer of a Christie's piece is a pseudonym, it suddenly becomes nefarious. So that stigma, whether of infantilizing a pseudonym or vilifying it, there seems to be nothing in between. So the slow erosion of this stigma around pseudonymity, I think, is in one way an expression of disbelief from the larger ecosystem. Why would anyone do that? And that comes from a mindset of never having thought about using a pseudonym, never having had to hide your real identity, or never seeing the advantage in being someone else for some time. So, in a sense, for a lot of us, it's deeply personal as well, right? It's an instinctive thing. It might have started off as something fun, but a pseudonym, what it does when you enter a new space, is to give you a non-judgmental runway. That drift, you can't bring anything to it, and it also represents a clean slate into where you're going. So the rise of the decentralized class, like Metacoven said, I think best describes it.
Cool. I have a question for just the people in this chat that are not pseudonyms, Andrew and Matthew. If one of you want to answer, why did you decide to go with your authentic identity in the NFT community? I know, Andrew, you were talking with G Money and helping coach him through the process. So I'm curious about your origin.
Yeah, so actually, I made a purposeful decision to not be pseudonymous because I thought that by attaching my name to it, it would be easier for me to basically, gain a following essentially. Because everyone, when I first got involved in NFTs back in 2019, everyone, and also crypto as well, everyone was pseudonymous. So I was like, okay, how do I stand out the most in terms of all these people that I'm surrounded by? I thought by using my real name and real identity, that would make me stand out. It's kind of funny because it's kind of the opposite in the mainstream world, but within the crypto sphere, it's kind of the norm, especially with NFTs. Now we're getting to the point where NFTs are getting more mainstream, so it's becoming more normal for people to use their real identities. But that was my reason why.
For my case, I mean, I wouldn't say that like I'm fully DAnon just because I only use half of my name, but the decision to, when possible, use my first name kind of stems from having a biblical name to begin with, which translates easily to like every different language. So like if I happen to be in Korea or something, I like to use the biblical pronunciation in the Korean Bible, like Mate. And every country has some version of that. So sticking with that, keeping that as like this identifier is just something that's super comfortable for me. But aside from that, in instances where I can't use Matthew because any new network, Matthew is one of the most sought after names that gets snapped up like rather immediately. I do have pseudonyms that I go under like Nifty Time now. But starting out, I had like the worst name ever. I chose bread _ crumbs. Crumbs spelled KRUMBS because I was in Korea. And the experience of living with a terrible pseudonym is something that is kind of limiting. Even if you're putting out good content and you're communicating something well, people can't find you. Like the design of the actual pseudonym, I think, is actually quite important. And switching to Nifty Time, something that is easy to say and easy to like write down, has kind of helped in terms of just allowing people to find you and search you out. Something that I haven't really heard a lot of people discuss is just like the design or choice of the actual name. Or pseudonym rather, that they go under and communicate themselves by heading forward.
That's fascinating, Matthew. I didn't know about the universal nature of Mate. I think that's what I'm going to call you now. I'm sorry. Just really. But no, it's really interesting because like Balaji was describing and we were discussing, it needs an order of effort. For a lot of people, it's instinctive. We just pick something out of thin air, it sticks, and you just run with it, which might, in hindsight, not be the best way to go about pseudonyms. But I do know for a fact that Metacoven agonized over days before he came up with his, and then sort of it still has to grow onto you. It's not like you can wear your exosuit the moment you've crafted it. You need to it pinches here, it doesn't fit properly, and you sort of have to take your time in trying to adjust to that new persona. Do you think that's one of the reasons why you know people usually don't instantly assume pseudonyms, or there is not widespread use of them? Because for some of us, it feels like a natural fit. It gives us that non-judgmental runway that I was talking about. To others, it represents a major pain in the butt.
Actually, I think everyone should try to find a pseudonym for themselves, and they will find out how hard it is, because it's such an interesting process, because the questions, it's a very there'll be an interesting set of questions that you would have to ask yourself, and that process of finding a pseudonym actually initiates that kind of, the human in you, the intention in you, a lot of things. So I think it's a very personal process. Yeah, it took me like I think a week to figure it out. I spoke to so many people. I remember speaking to Andrew also about this, and I spoke to my mom. I spoke to my friends who had no idea about the metaverse, and there were so many people involved, and I finally coming up with that name, and I had to be okay with it, right? And I had to feel like it, and in a way, for me, that name was definitely kind of gave that feeling that it was bigger than me. So I really enjoyed the pseudonym. Yeah, it immediately clicked on me in a few days, and it has stuck. So yeah, I think that process is what is very interesting.
Okay, there's a question from Park to all. He says, I believe it's harder to not be pseudonymous today. We all define ourselves from a single point of view, then it's impossible to define ourselves with facts. Where do we draw the line? For instance, is a Facebook profile not pseudonymous? Or is it more pseudonymous because it shows chosen identity once again? So, where do we draw the line? You see, this is a very meta feeling that I have. I'm a pseudonym as Troubadour, and I'm assuming Park's pseudonym, and suddenly I feel a lot smarter, a lot more confident, just because I'm trying to channel somebody else's voice. Just removing yourself even a little bit from the equation allows you to amplify what you want to do in this space, what you want to say, strangely. But anybody want to answer that question from Park?
I was just going to say, similar to what Pak said earlier, I've seen this when it comes to politics. It's not the individual that changes the institution, it's the institution that changes the individual. And so, as Pak was mentioning, that can be an institution. As you said, now you're acting as a mouthpiece for Pak. You notice changes in your stature.
True, very true. Awesome, guys. This was a fascinating conversation on a topic that I think we are at the cusp of, like truly discovering. Now, pseudonymity means different things to different people. We've approached it in a range of different ways. For some people, it means privacy, as Whale Shark put it. For Park, it means a limitless room to experiment. For Balaji, it represents security and programmable identities, and so on. And I'm sure as we explore the concept of pseudonymity, and we start to embrace it, the possibilities will begin to become endless, which is what we were hoping with this discussion itself as a start. So thank you so much for joining us on this first episode of NFT Radio. Pseudonyms are exosuits. Join us tomorrow for another crackling conversation. We'll let you know what it's about in just a little while. Brooke, Matthew, Metacoven, Park, Veritas, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you guys. Such a fun conversation.
Thank you. Until tomorrow.
Later, y'all.